Welcome to this installment of the Excel Events webinar series. We're going to wait just another minute or two for a few more folks to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to this installment of the Excel Events webinar series. Today we're going to be chatting about Event Planning 101. Your hosts today are going to be myself, John Kazarian. I'm one of the co-founders of Excel Events. I'm going to be joined by Zach Gopian, who is the other co-founder, and we're also going to be joined with a special guest, Melanie Woodward, who's the founder of Event Planning Blueprint. So before we jump in, I'm just going to share a couple of brief words about who we are. Excel Events is an event technology company. We assist organizations with their event ticketing and fundraising needs. So everything from selling tickets to your event to facilitating event promotion, silent auctions, raffles, and a whole list of other fundraising tools to help you raise more money at your next event. Over the past 5 years, we've had the opportunity to work with thousands and thousands of organizations, some of which I'm sure you're familiar with. You can see there's quite a few of them right here. And as I mentioned, this is part of a webinar series, so we do host this content quite frequently. And if you want to be the first to know about upcoming educational series that we're putting on, I'd suggest following us on both Twitter and Facebook. And I'm seeing a couple messages from people right now who are having a little bit of a hard time hearing us. Okay, sounds like there's a few other people who are able to hear us. So a couple of sort of housekeeping things here. If you are having any trouble hearing us, make sure that you do have the audio up on your device, computer, iPad, whatever it might be. And then before I turn it over to Zach, I just want to mention that there is this chat widget on the right side of the screen. So as you have questions throughout the presentation, definitely let us know, and we'll do our best to answer them throughout. If not, we'll follow up towards the end of the presentation. So with that, let me hand it over to Zach.
Awesome. Thanks, John, and welcome everyone to our Event Planning 101 webinar. As John mentioned, we're really excited to take the next 45 minutes or so to talk about everything event planning related, from setting your goals to choosing a venue, even covering things like promoting your event and selling tickets. So as John mentioned, I'm Zach Agopian, one of the co-founders at Excel Events. Really happy also to be joined by Melanie Woodward. So Melanie is the founder at Event Planning Blueprint, and she will be here to offer some great advice in terms of what she's seen that works in terms of setting goals for your event, choosing your venue, and planning for food and bev at your event. So we'll jump right into it with Melanie. After that, I will give you guys some information on what we have seen that works really well, both in terms of promoting your event and selling event tickets. And from there, what we'll do is open it up for some Q&A. As John mentioned, we also have the live chat feature open on the your right side of the screen. So if anybody has questions throughout the webinar, feel free to post those in the chat. We'll answer them either live during the webinar or maybe towards the end. Also, I did see a question before the webinar started about slides. We will be sharing these slides following the conclusion of the webinar. So both a recording of the webinar and the slides will be sent out as follow-up. So let's get started now. Like I said, I wanted to introduce everyone to Melanie Woodward. So Melanie, we're really excited to have you here. If you want to maybe give a quick just intro to yourself and Event Planning Blueprint, that would be great. And then we can jump right into it.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me, Zach and John, and everyone else who is listening. So as Zach said, my name is Melanie Woodward, and I'm the owner and founder, creator of Event Planning Blueprint. We have been helping event planners or people who want to become event planners get into the industry for the last 6 years. And before that, I had my own event planning business that I started back in 2004, pre-webinars and pre-internet. So it was kind of old school. And yeah, I worked with lots of celebrities, Hollywood celebrities, professional athletes, and I did events anywhere from like 8 people to over 30,000 people doing festivals and all the components of those festivals. So I've been doing this for a while.
Awesome. Yeah. And so as you guys can tell, Melanie really is going to be our subject matter expert here. So really excited to have her here to join. I can do kind of a quick plug for you, Melanie. She also has great content on her website. We're huge fans of her Event Planning Blueprint blog, as well as some of her video content you guys can find on YouTube. So really excited to have Melanie with us. And what we're going to do now with Melanie is kind of jump in to some of those topics that I mentioned previously. So to start, we really want to talk about setting event goals. And Melanie, I can kind of turn it over to you. Would love to hear where you suggest either people hosting events or event planners start when they go about defining their event objectives or starting to set their event goals.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would really love to hear from, just to start it off, because I wanted to kind of make this a Q&A, and I'm going to go through a bit of information as well for each piece of each topic. But I'd love to hear from you guys. How much experience do you have in event planning? If you could just give me in terms of months or years in the chat, that would be really helpful. But to answer your question, Zach, I think really no matter how much experience you have, the best place to start is not always the fun stuff. And I know often people will think, oh, event planning is so fun, and yes, it is. But you really need to understand why you're planning that event. So that's why I wanted to start with what is an event objective? Like, why do you even need it? Because quite often it's the piece that people either just don't do at all, or they don't know that they should be doing it, or you think, oh, I can just do this in my head. Like I've had a conversation with my client, or I'm planning my own event and I know what the event objective is. And then what ends up happening is if you fall into any of those categories where you either don't do it, you think you know it, or you just kind of try and do it in your head, that's where, excuse the French, shit hits the fan, where things start going wrong, right? So what I really recommend you guys start with is doing that event objective. And I can see that Bruce has 17 years of experience. We've got Jasmine with 3 years of experience. So I'd love to hear from you guys as well. Like, you know, and maybe you don't call it an event objective, but do you guys actually do this when you sit down with a client and do something, you know, where you really define the who, what, where, when, and why? And it's not complicated. It really is just going through each of those pieces, the 5 W's, and saying like, okay, who will be at the event? Who is this event actually for? The what is as simple as, is there a theme, you know, and what are the attendees expected to do? So things like, you know, do they need to RSVP? Is there a certain dress code that they need to adhere to, or that they should be aware of? The where is, okay, well, where is this event going to take place, right? So you want to make sure when you're thinking about where is the event going to take place, is it somewhere that's really easy for them to get to? Does it make sense for the event in terms of maybe you have a theme, you know, so you want to kind of just think in the bigger spectrum of where is that event, because some venues work and some don't. We're going to talk about venues in just a minute. And then of course the when, so what's the date of the event? When is this happening? And does that also make sense for the type of event that you want to plan? And then the why. So why is this event happening? Is a wedding, a promotional event, anything like that? So really that is the crux of doing an event objective. So like I said, I want to do this as a Q&A. I'm going to give you guys some kind of talking points, if you will, but I'd love to hear either your experiences with this, or if you have any questions about it, that would be great, because that's what I'm really here to help you guys do, is just, you know, answer your questions and then give you some things to think about in terms of your own events. All right, so I can see, let me just go through here. Okay, so we've got a lot of people with like 3 years, 5 years. Like I said, Bruce has 17 years. That's awesome. So a lot of experience in here. So this, you know, like I said, I'd love to hear from you guys about what you do around the event objective.
Yeah,
Now,
and guys, feel free to post your what you guys do with your event objectives or any questions in the chat. Melanie, I can speak for myself. I know some of the people in the webinar have heard a bit about John and the event that John and I run each year in Boston. So
yep.
We are a very, I'd say, specific subset of events. We run a fundraising event each year. We have about 1,000 people that attend in Boston, and our objective is very clear, obviously, around fundraising. And so I think for us, some of the things you mentioned are really important. One that stood out to me is the dress code. So we actually do have we call our event the Fall Formal. So it is formal attire. But I would say even when we are clear about defining it, we definitely get some questions about, you know, what am I supposed to wear, things like that. So I can definitely relate to that tip, and being as clear as possible, and almost even reiterating what either the dress code is, or I think same goes for things like the directions. Where is the event? How could you actually get there? Going a bit deeper into it, is there parking? You know, what address should I put in if I'm calling an Uber or a Lyft? All of those things are things we've dealt with as well. So I think it's important to map these out, as you mentioned.
Yeah, those are really great points to bring up, because like I said earlier, you know, a lot of people will just do it in their head, or they think, yeah, this is the event, so that's the event objective. But when you actually sit down, and I recommend you, if you have clients, you do it with the client. You know, in your case, you guys are doing it, this is your event, you're running it, so you sit down and do this, but actually go through each of these things, because what it ends up doing is creating a conversation around what's really important about the event. And I know I've kind of oversimplified it here with just like the who, what, where, when, and why. But when you really sit down and you're thinking specifically about a very specific type of event that you're running, more comes out than you think will, right? So I know I kind of like gave you like who, okay, so who's going to be here? Well, you start defining who that person actually looks like. And then when you have all that stuff and you've kind of mapped it out or written it out, then it really makes a lot of, not just the planning a lot easier, but also if you're doing any sort of marketing, then it makes that a lot easier, so that you know exactly who you're speaking to, especially if you're doing a fundraiser and trying to sell tickets. That makes it super easy to be like, okay, this is kind of our quote unquote avatar, right? And this is the person, because this event isn't just important to us to raise funds for our cause, but it's also important to the person coming to that event. And they've also got some sort of connection and reason that they want to be there. So by doing this, you can actually speak to them as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Definitely understanding, who you're targeting, how to speak to them. It looks like based on some of the comments in the chat here, we have a pretty decent variety of kind of roles. So some people here, it looks like they're focused on fundraising events. Others are, looks like Bruce works for a nonprofit as well, but is kind of managing a full team. Denise here, it looks like she's actually focused more on, there's different free events she's hosting where based on the event, she could be driving appointments or maybe even be selling retail. So it sounds like a little bit different in terms of, some of these examples are very specific, like my event on fundraising, raising funds. That's going to make a big difference in terms of the who, what, and probably the why. But then for some of these other people in the webinar and on the chat, there's going to be a different set of objectives. So totally agree with you that obviously the who, what, when, where, why seems simple at first, but it also is very flexible and allows you to dive into the type of event that you are running.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right, Zach. It is very simple when you look at it, but and I purposely did that because I know we've got a lot of different people on listening today with a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different focuses. So I just want to make it applicable, obviously, to everyone that is here. So you're exactly right.
Totally. Any other questions from the group on this? I have one specifically for Melanie, but anybody else, feel free to type in the chat. So Melanie, my question for you, obviously, these are important objectives. I think over the years, myself running different events, I've gained a little bit more expertise in how to set these objectives. But in terms of timing, is this, really something you'd recommend regardless of your event to be one of the first steps you take before getting started, or when would you suggest people start to map out these objectives?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you asked that. I definitely think this is the very first thing that you should do because it really sets the tone for everything else. And like I mentioned, the marketing and that piece comes later, but the planning, the conversations you have, the people who are involved. And so really what it is doing is it's mapping out all of those pieces, if you will, that are included in planning an event, right? And all of the stakeholders and any staff that you may have or volunteers. It encompasses all of that. So if you don't let's just pretend you don't do the event objective and you start planning an event and then it's like halfway through, you're almost getting to the event stage and you realize you missed a whole bunch of pieces that you now have to scramble to get.
Mm-hmm.
And this really just helps you avoid a lot of that.
Yeah, I think that's what I've seen as well, is starting earlier is a lot better. I can think back to some of the original events I was part of or helped with where maybe we knew why we were running the event, but we hadn't thought enough about the who or, even the venue, which I know we're going to talk about in a bit, but specifically talking about the target or even if you leave out one of these steps in objective planning, I think it makes it a lot harder down the line, whether it's relating to having the correct messaging or even setting your goals properly. So I think that's really important to start with your objectives. For us, again, on the fundraising side, we have a committee that we work with. So we typically define the objectives with them. I think on the event planning side, like you said, it's very important to probably set these expectations up front with your clients and kind of have that mutual discussion around objectives. Would you say that's where your head is at too?
Yeah, totally. If you are working with clients, then it's really important to involve them in this because when you have conversations like this with them, what ends up coming out is their why. Like, why are they actually having this event? And I know I've got why at the bottom there, what is the event? Is it a promotional event or a wedding type of thing? But there's more to it than just having a wedding. Right? There's more to it than just having a promotional event. And so when you involve your clients in this type of conversation, you really understand what's important to them. And it's usually much bigger than just having something, like I said, like a wedding or just a promotional event. There's more to it usually. Totally.
Yeah. I think the why is almost everything kind of cascades down from there. It looks like Bruce over in the chat here mentions that that's the first thing they do as well. So that's typically a great place to start, I think, and everything kind of shoots off from there.
Yeah, they work well together. Like I just saw Bruce's comment there too. And it's not that one is better than the other. I think they work well together.
Totally.
You have to know both. right? So yeah, so like the why is kind of the bigger picture, and then the event objective is kind of like breaking it down into the pieces so that the why is fulfilled.
For sure. Great. Well, I think this is a good place to leave off on this slide. Of course, if anybody has questions or feedback that comes up throughout the rest of the presentation, feel free to type it in there.
Totally.
But otherwise, we'll move on to our next topic with Melanie. So event venues. I think this is definitely something that kind of has a lot of meat to it. So Melanie, I know you have a few questions on here of things to look out for. Maybe we start there or start off with some of the questions you have for our audience.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I've got about 5 things to kind of ask yourself about venues. A couple of them I've included here as well. But I want to kind of ask you guys as well, since, we've got a lot of experience from people on here. And even if you don't have a lot of experience, please, let me know about, even if you're volunteering, to me, that's still experience. I want to know how many of you are kind of guilty of this, whether it's currently or it's been in the past. How many of you think, like, when you're choosing a venue, that the least expensive venue is always the best venue because it fits into the budget? Anyone? Just a yes or a no, and in the chat is fine for that. Quick and easy. So what I want you to remember, that when you're planning an event, you're really creating an experience, right? So and that experience is not just for your client or for your team, or for the attendees, but it is also for your team, because they help you create that experience if you have a team. So really, when you're choosing the right venue, it's one of the most important decisions that you're going to make, right? So is it the right space for the event? Does it fit with the theme? And when you're just going back to some of the event objectives, when you go through that event objective, this will really help you decide whether or not, or even narrow down whether or not an event venue is suitable for the type of event and the type of experience that you're trying to create. So I want to know, actually, I'm going to give you guys a bunch of questions here that you can write down. There's a couple of them on here, and then I've got another one here, and you can just write them down. So you want to just make sure that you're asking, like, is the venue conveniently located for people to get to? So, Zach, you've talked about a fundraiser, and, this kind of goes for any type of event, really. You want to make it really easy for people to get to, but especially if you're doing something where it is, you're selling tickets, right? Because people don't typically want to go too far out of their way to get to an event. And of course, depends on where you live as well, whether you're in a rural or an urban location. There's some different variables there, but definitely just ask yourself, is it a convenient location for people to get to? Another question is, will anything stop them from getting to that venue, right? So, or even parking around the venue. Make sure you're aware of what that situation is, or even depending, if there's Uber or Lyft or public transit or anything like that. So just thinking things like construction. And you can find out all of this information from those venues, because they're typically, if there's something like construction going on, then they're typically in the know before that happens. So if you know when your event's coming up, or you can also check with the city to make sure, so that you can just make a contingency plan for that if it's going to happen. All right. The other thing that you want to know is how many staff will be available at the venue for your event. Okay. So if any, sometimes depending on the venue that you're using, they may not, you have to supply all the staff, but they will probably have someone there. So you want to make sure that you know who's going to be there and what their roles are, so that they're part of the discussion when you are going in to do those site visits, when you're just like right before your event. So kind of doing like a pre-con meeting, so that everyone is on the same page. And then what, if any, are there any restrictions that you need to be aware of? And this is one that people often don't ask, because either they just forget or they may not know. But just things like, can you bring in outside food? Some venues you can, some you can't. And is that important to you, right? So those are the types of things that you probably define in your event objectives. So then when you go to the venue, you already know to ask. Or what about if you want to put promotional banners up on the walls? Can you do that? A lot of venues, especially if you're in hotels, do not allow anything on their walls. But is there any way to get around that? Sometimes, they definitely don't want things like nails or tacks going in, but there's often two-way tape that will work, or something, some sort of like putty that doesn't damage their walls, right? So just knowing those little things really saves you a lot of headaches in the end. And then of course, what's included, but then equally as important, what's not included. And I always like to ask that question is that, okay, so you've given me everything that is included in this proposal from the venue. So now I want to ask you, what is not included? What have I missed? What comes up for other event planners or other events that they typically need that is not already listed here, right? So some of the things just to watch out for are gratuities and taxes. And that can really throw off your budget, especially, gratuities and taxes, because depending on where you live, that could be upwards of another 15 to 20%, maybe even 25% added on to your final bill. Right. So I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat here. Pop-up banners are a good way around hanging things up at a hotel. Totally, Maya. Absolutely. So there's always workarounds, but it's just good to know what you need to do so that you're prepared before, it's 2 days before your event, or worse yet, the day of your event, and you're just finding that out in the morning, right? Because if you don't have those pop-up banners already, then I don't know if you could get them made the day of. Up to 30% near me, says Shira. Yeah, see, like that's a lot if you don't know what's not included, and all of a sudden you've got these gratuities and taxes added on that you just didn't ask about, or they don't typically put those into the proposal, and you get those in the final bill, right? And then it's a little bit of a surprise that most people don't want. All right, Maya saying, unfortunately, we only had one venue that could hold the amount of people we were attend for our fundraising event. Right. So, yeah. So sometimes you're limited to that. And that happens a lot. Like, that's why in a lot of the bigger cities, like take Vegas, for example, a lot of really, really big conferences happen there because at least in North America, there's very few locations that can actually handle the size of the type of conferences that some people want to run. So yeah, you do have limitations there sometimes that you really need to be aware of as well. So any questions around venues, I'm happy to answer them, or any comments, of course, happy to just go through that as well.
Yeah, Melanie, I can in here. Sorry, guys, if there's any this is Zach. So just wanted to say, I think these are all great tips. One thing I've noticed specifically is, again, after running events for a few years, you start to get the hang of what to ask and some of these things to look out for. I'd say these tips are awesome that Melanie's providing. Especially for people that may be kind of embarking on their first event, because that's when I think you're prone to being exposed to maybe forgetting some of these things or not asking the right questions. And for us, it was definitely a learning process over a few years. So, if I had this webinar or this list going into our first event, I think it would have been hugely helpful. So hopefully this is beneficial to some people on the webinar. The other thing I would mention is, like, for us, it definitely, thinking of the venue, it definitely becomes an exercise where we are planning ahead of time. So, the first year, again, I mentioned our event has about 1,000 people in Boston. So to Maya's point, same idea. There's not a ton of venues in Boston that can hold that many people. And so our first year, we decided to, I think we started planning our event, to be honest, in September, and it was a November event. So it was really last second. Obviously, moving forward from there, what we did was we kind of learned our lesson, and now we book our venue out at least a year in advance. And so these are, small kind of nuances, I think, that people probably in the webinar already, some of those of you with more experience obviously kind of know these tips, but some people that mentioned they had under a year experience, these are things you're going to start learning and understanding as you start planning going forward.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point, actually, even about the, if you only have one venue. I know Shira said it as well, or sorry, Maya said it. And yeah, you have to really get on it and plan 1, 2, sometimes 3 years in advance, depending on the event and the location.
For sure. And kind of, at least book it out enough so you can hold your date as well.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, it's like wedding planning, right? Like everyone's booked a year or two in advance. It's very similar, especially when you're holding larger events. Your limitations are definitely something that you have to consider.
For sure. I agree. Well, great. We will leave it open again for questions on venues here. Want to continue moving along with Melanie. The last thing we want to talk about with her is something I think is really important, more important now than I thought it was when I first started planning events, is planning and ordering for food and bev.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to make this one really easy for you guys. because there are, there's so many variables. And I know a lot of people on this webinar are, span from just getting started up to what someone said it was 17 years, right? So lots of different experience. So I made it really easy. If you just click on that link, or if you're live with us and you've got the chat, I just put in a URL. There is an actual guide that I've given you there so that you can print it off. You can download it. It's just some catering guidelines so that you know exactly how much food to order for your events. Now, the thing with events, with food and beverage, it really is the most important piece of your entire event. And here's why. Because everyone remembers it. No one remembers anything else except the food and beverage. So if you think back to any event that you've ever planned or any event you've ever attended, think about what you remember most. It's going to involve food and beverage. Maybe not directly. As Samantha says, oh, so true, exclamation mark. Yeah, it's true. And here's the other thing that you need to be aware of with that, and this is why I've included the guideline just to make it really easy for you guys, is that food and beverage will often take up to 30% of your overall budget. So it's usually the most expensive piece of the event and where you're going to spend the most money. But what I want to just caution you about is don't let that scare you, especially if you guys are just getting started and you don't have a lot of experience with this. You are better off spending, at least in my opinion, you're better off spending more money on the food and beverage and trying to save in other areas, because people are going to remember it. If you give them something that is really tasty and they have a great experience with that, they're going to want to come back to your event. And then you can improve those other things as you get more people. But the food and beverage is definitely not where you want to start saving your money.
I think that's a great tip. Again, I can give some anecdotal feedback here. Our first event, fundraiser, very focused on raising funds, focus probably a bit more on some of the entertainment, maybe on the venue than the food side of things. We actually sent out a survey following the end of our first event and received and we're just looking for general feedback from our audience and ways we could improve the event for the following year. And we got a ton of feedback on food and bev. So since then, over the last few years, we've completely kind of revamped it, made it more of a centerpiece, I would say, of the event, whether it's both, I'd say, on the food and beverage side. And it's something that we get really good feedback on now. So I totally agree. It's something, I think this applies to any type of event, really, whether it's fundraising or, any of the other events we've talked about, conferences, maybe if we're looking at membership signups or selling, more of a retail focus, I still think this is going to be a component that applies to each type of event.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I love food, good food. Let me stress that. So I'm one of those people who will be particularly picky about it. And, I also don't eat a lot. I eat a regular amount of food. But if if the food's really bad, or if I go home hungry, there's nothing that annoys me more going to an event, especially if I paid for the ticket. And then I end up going to somewhere like McDonald's or something afterwards because I'm so hungry.
Yeah, I think that's an easy way. It's definitely an easy way to turn off your audience.
Yeah.
I also agree with what Samantha said here, along with, the right food and drink. I think the other side of it is timing it properly. So that's something that's definitely important. Here, Samantha mentioned having it offered consistently throughout the event. I think that's a great comment as well.
Totally. That is a really good comment. Thanks for offering that, Samantha. Yeah, it's a bit of an art, isn't it? And it's this is why, I know for the people who are just getting started, in one of my programs, I talk about this, and we actually give an outline. And one of the things that I really strongly suggest that people do is pick a niche. And it's for these little details, because if you're doing the same type of event, you can become a master at those things, like timing. And it just makes the overall experience better. Whereas if you're doing a whole bunch of different types of events, and you've got to remember all of those things, because timing is different for different types of events and for what people need and want, right? So you guys are doing a fundraiser. I mean, I don't know, is it a sit-down fundraiser?
So ours is not a sit-down fundraiser. It's actually more of I'd call it, it's more of we want it to be very engaging. So it's less of a sit-down speaker session, thing like that. We have a live band. We do open bar. I actually saw Maya's question here about a 1,500 person event. For our 1,000 person event, we found that food stations work really well. I think it goes well with the style of our event, because people are moving around throughout the venue. But I definitely think on that end, it would depend on a few things. Definitely depends on the venue, like Samantha said. I think it depends on the style of the event. So obviously, if our event was a sit down versus being more of an open air event, we may think of maybe a buffet style or something like that compared to food stations.
Yeah, I agree. I love the food station idea as well for that size of event, because if you got to think of the flow of the event too. So if you have a buffet trying to put through 1,500 people, you could have a really, really big room, and it's got to be so efficient, right?
Totally.
Served, it's like anything's possible. These are all possible options, but in terms of just like the overall experience, I personally like the food stations for something like that.
Totally. I think it adds some flexibility. Looking at Brett's question here, suggesting around when to have food compared to a live auction, I would say I recommend beforehand. Maybe you could do some type of dessert or something like that after. My number one suggestion personally, we do auctions at our event, is definitely not during the live auction. That's you want to try to keep people or keep distractions to a minimum if possible.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing, distractions are really key if you're doing a live auction. And you really just, Brett, I would suggest that you go back to the event objective and think about why you're having that event. I suspect it's some sort of fundraiser if you're doing a live auction. So your goal, your reason for having those people in the room is to get them to buy things, right? So if you've got them going to food stations or there's distractions, people walking around, their attention is gone. And let's face it, like attention spans were bad probably like 10 years ago. They're really bad now. So
totally agree.
Object syndrome. So they see dessert coming out in the live auction, they're gone. You lost them to the chocolate cake.
Yeah. Wait till they've already eaten to get the live auction going, or do it once the auction's concluded.
Yeah, and you can even do like a timeline sort of, with the menu setting, and just let them know, people know dinner is served at this time, live auction, so that they also mentally prepare for that live auction and they know to get their credit cards ready.
Great. Yeah, I love that tip. Awesome. So guys, let's move on here. I think this was great, Melanie. We appreciate all of these tips. I think these are super helpful. Everybody, watching here, I would definitely say to follow the link that Melanie sent. She also has some really good, like I said, other content both on her YouTube channel and blog. So she's going to stick around for the webinar and maybe for some Q&A at the end of the event. But for now, what we will do is move on. And just to wrap up, I'll go through a couple tips that we've seen at Excel events in terms of both selling tickets and promoting events. So again, I mentioned my event is more a fundraising focus. As John mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, though, we work with events of all kinds. So we work with thousands of events. Over the course of doing so, we've learned a lot about best practices in terms of promoting and selling tickets, regardless of the event type. So we're really happy to share some of these tips. Of course, would love to hear your guys' feedback or any questions you have. So to start off, we kind of want to start with the basics. The first tip we have in terms of selling tickets is going to be to choose a ticketing provider that makes the most sense for your event. Now, there's a ton of ticketing providers out there. It can be a pretty overwhelming landscape currently. So what I always recommend is to focus on a few key criteria. What I've done is listed out some of these on the slide here, but just to run through them quickly, the major factors that we suggest looking at as you're doing your research, we'll start with price. So this is a no-brainer. When you think about pricing from a ticketing platform, a few things to consider are their cost structure. So is the platform charging a flat fee per ticket? Are they charging a percentage, or are they charging a combination? Also, look into credit card fees. So this could maybe be a hidden fee that you'll want to keep in mind as you're building out your goals and your projections in terms of what your costs will be. The other option here is, can you pass the ticket fees onto your buyer? So most platforms give you an option to either absorb the fees or pass them on to your buyer. The good news here is if you pass those fees on, then the platform essentially becomes free for your organization. So that could be an area where you realize some cost savings. The next section I'd consider is customization. When I mention customization, there's a few different elements I'm referring to here. The first will be in terms of your actual event page. So the page in which people will buy their tickets. Now, we suggest finding a platform where this is customizable so that you can create your own design, make this branded and really have your own look and feel as well as your messaging. I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide. But the other customization I'm mentioning is in terms of your actual tickets. So can you add multiple ticket types? if you have an event where you want VIPs as well as maybe early bird or general admission, you'll want a platform that has that flexibility. You'll also want flexibility in terms of the data you're collecting from your ticket buyers. So maybe you want to collect information beyond just their name, email, and phone number. You may want to collect information on the type of meal they're looking for at the event, or maybe if you're giving out merchandise, you want to collect their shirt size or something like that. So look for a platform where you have that flexibility. The next one, it is pretty simple, but often overlooked, is customer support. So does the platform you are working with, do they have 24/7 live support? Can you reach somebody on the weekends, which is when your event may be? You want to be able to actually have somebody live either on the event or on the weekends while you're setting up your event or during your event. So that's really important. And then finally, we recommend having a strong check-in capability. So check-in, in my opinion, can make or break your event. This is something where you want to definitely avoid lines. You want to avoid having people wait in line for a long time to check in. And so we recommend using a platform with really easy check-in capabilities. Something Excel Events offers is actually a full mobile app, which allows your staff to simply scan tickets using their phone or look up a user by their name. And so that's really easy to do, and it makes check-in very easy. So those are some of our tips. Looks like we have a question from Samantha on platforms that we recommend. I'll say I'm a little biased here just because Excel Events is an event ticketing platform. So I would highly recommend Excel Events if you're in the market for a new platform. I think, and feel free to follow up with us directly if you'd like to chat, but I think we hit upon these features pretty well in terms of our offering. So if I had to give my plug or my recommendation, I would have to recommend Excel Events. So as we kind of continue through our tips here, the next tip, once you've chosen your ticketing provider, is to create a really appealing event page. So your event page, again, is where your attendees are going to come to purchase their tickets. Similar to Melanie's tips on planning out your objectives, we recommend starting with the basics here. Talk about who, what, when, why, where. These are things that you can align really nicely to your goals and objectives for the event. And you can also make sure your attendees or your audience are going to be aligned on those goals as well. I mentioned customization before. To the end that this affects your event page will be on your images or logos for your organization or for your event. We really recommend having your page or using a provider that is mobile friendly. There's a ton of people, all the stats out there are saying how many more people are browsing the internet on their phone, how many more people are making purchases on their phone. This applies to buying event tickets as well. So make sure your provider gives you a mobile friendly page so that you're not missing out on those sales. Another pro tip, Melanie mentioned this in her goals as well. Be very clear on where your event is. Most platforms now give you the opportunity to include a map on your event page. So this will show people exactly where your event is. We'd recommend including that. So continuing here, we really want to make sure you have clear messaging and a clear CTA or call to action for people that come to your page. People have very short attention spans. As Melanie mentioned, we want to make sure they can come to your site, quickly understand what your event is about, and then be able to understand what they have to do to continue forward or to buy a ticket. So we really recommend clear messaging and also using easy to find checkout buttons. So once somebody understands your event, they can simply click a button and buy their tickets. The last two things I want to show here are creating a sense of urgency. I have a few more tips on that coming up, but essentially there are a few things you can do on your page to kind of create a sense of urgency or fear of missing out from your audience so that they quickly buy tickets. And then I mentioned this, but make sure checkout is really easy. You don't want to have too many steps for your users. You don't want them to struggle to find the page to check out. So try to use a platform that's as easy as possible to make this happen.
And Zach, just to add one thing to that, sort of along the lines of checkout, it's also important to make sure that you're getting paid out before the event ends. As Melanie mentioned, events are expensive. Catering is a big chunk of that, and they often require a 50% deposit well in advance of your event. So if you can start receiving some of that revenue before the event ends, you don't have to pay out of pocket to cover those early on expenses.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip as well. So thanks for that, John. So again, any other questions from you guys, feel free to send them in the chat. We'll continue with some of our tips here. Quick, easy slide as a break here. We recommend starting as early as possible when promoting your event. We will send out this slide and this link, but we linked to a blog post we created a while back specifically around promoting your event. So we go through 22 different tips here. I'll cover some of these in the next few slides, but feel free to check this out in your free time. So moving on here, as you start to promote your event. So we've started selling tickets, we've chosen our ticketing provider, we've created our event page. Now it's time to start promoting. One of your best assets in terms of promoting your event will be creating an email strategy. So I've included a couple examples here and on the next slide on emails we've seen that work really well. This one specifically actually happens to be from the event that I keep referring to that we run each year. But some tips in terms of your email strategy, we'd recommend creating a plan. So don't just send out emails, whenever you feel like it's the right time. When you are starting to plan your event, we also recommend building out this communication strategy. So based on when your sales are going live or when your event is occurring, you can have different emails that you're scheduled to send out at a really structured cadence. A few common updates we'd recommend to use email updates for will be ticket sales dates. So, hey, tickets are live, or this is the last week tickets will be on sale, or maybe early bird tickets are going on sale tomorrow, things like that. If you've reached a certain goal, whether it's tickets sold or funds raised or any other goal you may have reached, sales, for example, with your event, that's a great update to send out to your audience. Or just general event updates. So this applies to any event. This could be new speakers or new sessions that are going to be joining your event or your conference. Or maybe updates, if it's a fundraising event, updates on new silent auction items that you have, maybe some really high ticket items. The last tip we have for your email strategy is not to forget a reminder email before your event. So this email can go out either the day of your event or the day before. This is a really crucial email. A couple things here. One, we recommend just giving someone an update on the basics, when and where is the event, but also including any of those other guidelines we talked about with Melanie. So what is the dress code? How can you get to the event? Maybe even include their ticket in this email so that they can easily access that. So that we find that email is really crucial and really helpful in terms of reminding your users to join the event. So I gave one more slide here on email strategy. This is just a great example we've seen from a fundraising event specifically promoting their silent auction via email. So this organization in Boston, Brigham and Women's Hospital, they have done a great job promoting their silent auction via email. What they did here is they built an email strategy, and then they decided to highlight some of their best items. So you'll see on the right here, this email does a great job in telling people about the auction, but also creating a sense of urgency by actually having a countdown to when the auction and the event will end. So they create that urgency that drives people to click on the link and start bidding online ahead of time. So obviously to that point, we would recommend including a link to your auction. And then from an analytics standpoint, this group did a great job of tracking their email. So they tracked different times when they would send events or send emails that would have the best effect. They also were tracking clicks and conversion to see which parts of the email or which emails and subject lines, things like that, performed the best. So that's something that you guys could keep in mind for those of you running fundraising events. It looks like Brett mentioned this works really well for live auction items as well. Totally agree. I think live auction items tend to be higher ticket items in general. And so promoting those via email can really get people excited as they get ready to join your event and start participating. So just continuing here, social media is going to be a huge tool for your fundraising event or your event of any kind. What we recommend in terms of leveraging social media, we have a strategy that we followed and we've seen a lot of success with other events in terms of starting with your network. So while you'll definitely be trying to appeal to as many people as possible for your event, finding some momentum early by first inviting or having your friends or close network purchase tickets to the event and start posting about the event will give you that early momentum needed to start driving ticket sales. So that's something we highly recommend, starting with your network, your friends, your family. This also goes for your staff or your committee's friends and family. Don't be afraid to tap into their network as well. Another tip here, though, is to encourage supporters to share about the event when they've purchased their own ticket. So you'll see this example on the bottom. Most platforms provide a really simple notification when somebody has purchased their ticket. If you're lucky, you'll choose a platform that has the option of sharing that ticket purchase on social media. And what this does, it's really important. It's essentially turning your ticket buyers into promoters of your event. They can help your event go viral, help increase the impressions and the reach your event is generating simply by, clicking share on Facebook and sharing that they bought a ticket to your event. So this is something we've seen that is really effective, and we'd recommend you include this in your event as well. So one other tip here, I mentioned creating kind of that sense of urgency or fear of missing out, FOMO as we call it. This is what's going to really encourage your ticket buyers or people coming to your event to move quickly through your checkout page and actually buy your ticket instead of waiting for a later date to buy their ticket. A few ways we do this are by creating variability in your ticket types. So creating early bird versus VIP. If somebody sees an early bird ticket versus a last minute ticket, and they realize that the early bird ticket is $10 or $20 less, that is going to drive them and really urge them to buy their ticket earlier. So this is something that you can use, a mechanism that you can use to drive early ticket sales. Along the same lines here, we recommend, and I know the text is small in the image here, but you'll see two things. One, we're including the remaining number of tickets left for that ticket type. And we're also including a countdown in terms of how many more days or when is the date when that ticket sale will end. Both of those tools are, again, creating urgency so that people who come to the site can see that countdown moving down and say, oh no, I better buy my ticket before they run out or before the sale is over. Again, these are both tips that will help you sell tickets faster and will lead to more people buying tickets when they're on your page rather than leaving and then coming back. And then finally, I mentioned this before. We recommend having your ticket buyers share their ticket buying experience or share about your event once they have purchased their ticket. So before we open it up to Q&A, I have a quick list of general tips we followed previously that have been really successful. These are all included in the 22 ways to promote your event that we mentioned. But just to run through these quickly, I mentioned this, but we recommend leveraging your past attendees in your audience. So your past attendees are people that already trust your event. They've had a great experience. These people not only can be repeat ticket buyers, but can be really effective in helping promote your event. So this would be a group we recommend going to early as you start selling tickets in order to drive those early ticket sales. I mentioned this as well, but maximize your network. So start out with the people that you know best and that you trust. If you're looking to sell tickets quickly or run a challenge, we recommend a ticket giveaway. You can offer free tickets to somebody that either refers the most people or helps share your event on social media. As you're trying to promote your event, we highly recommend leveraging the local press. This could be newspapers, radio, TV, magazines, whatever works best or wherever you can break through to a publication, we'd recommend doing this. So for example, with our event, we're typically listed in different calendars or social calendars around Boston. Back to the idea of social media, 2 tips on here. Number 5 is create a hashtag for your event. Give your users a way to tag your event on social media, whether it's before the event or after. This again will help increase your social footprint and drive additional sales. But you may also want to use influencers or local influencers to promote your event. Find people that aren't necessarily celebrities in your market, and they're not celebrities, but they're what we call influencers, and ask them to promote your event. They can drive a lot of influence and a lot of sales for you, and all you need to give them probably is a ticket to the event. So it's a very low cost way to help promote the event. We talked about Melanie's tips on creating a great venue, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Tip 7 here, consider ad retargeting. So this is a really interesting one for some of you guys to consider, where we've seen a lot of success. The idea here is that you can use your ticketing platform. Excel Events offers this feature, for example, where we can help you understand who is coming to your ticketing event or your ticketing page and leaving the page before checking out. You can then run targeted ads for your event to those people so that when they're either on Facebook or on the internet, they start seeing ads for your event. What that will do is remind them your event is happening and give them a quick nudge to go back to the page and start buying their tickets. So we'd highly recommended that. And then our final tip is create a sizzle reel. So once you guys start running more and more events, which I know a lot of you have, we'd recommend if you have any footage, you may create a great video or even put together a string of images from your events. You can use that content to promote your next event. Give people an idea of what your event will be like, what the energy and the vibe will be there, and that will help drive more ticket sales. So we definitely recommend using this content from past events to promote your future events. So that is everything that I wanted to cover. Thank you guys for bearing with me on those tips. We have a few minutes left. We'd love to open it up to any other questions. But if not, like I said, we will follow up and send out these slides as well as the webinar and a recording. So any other questions from the audience or from anything you guys, any input, questions, things like that? Looks like somebody is asking, is retargeting included? So the ability to kind of cookie or pixel people that have come to your page, that is something that's included in our platform. Obviously, if you then wanted to go and run a targeted ad on Facebook, for example, that would be impacted by your budget to run these ads. But in terms of the feature, yes, it's included in Excel events specifically. So it looks like Samantha has a question. We are struggling with late registrations. Our ticket system isn't smart enough for early or late registrations. So it sounds like you don't have the ability here to do maybe different ticket types, early bird versus late. In which case I would recommend or consider switching to a platform that offers that. It's a fairly basic feature at this point. I think it really offers a good range of ticket sales. So it gives you the ability, like you said, to get in those later early registrations, to sell tickets at the door, for example. So I would actually, if possible, recommend looking into another platform to use. So any other questions, guys? If not, I think we can wrap up with a couple minutes to spare here. So in conclusion, really wanted to thank everybody for joining here. Actually, it looks like we have one more question. So it looks like Mallory is asking, how much is the ticketing platform? So great question. I can answer that specifically for Excel events. In terms of our pricing, we charge $1 per ticket plus 1% of the ticket sale amount. So that is our standard pricing. As I mentioned in the previous slide, though, we do offer the ability for event hosts to pass that fee on to their ticket buyers. So this is something that we see a lot of event hosts do. Essentially, this makes the platform free for those users. And Samantha asks, how about reaching people who don't use social media? That's a great question. I think there's still, a decent audience that does not use social media, or maybe they're not on the channels you're promoting. In this case, I would recommend going back to that email strategy. So email communication strategy, while a lot of people don't use social media, I think the usage of email is pretty saturated at this point. So I think focusing, kind of doubling down on an email strategy can be really effective there. How many emails is too many? I think it depends on your event and your audience. You certainly do not want to exhaust your audience and make them sick of seeing your emails. You still want to have a good impact as you send each out. So I think that's something you can test with your event. With our event specifically, we test it out every year and kind of look at our historical numbers in terms of open rates and clicks for each email. We send about 4 or 5 emails in the 2 months leading up to our event. That's what we've found to be the most effective. But I think, again, it can certainly depend on your event and how engaged your audience is. So great, guys. I appreciate all the questions. I think we're going to wrap up here. Again, we will follow up with this webinar recording and slides. But I really want to thank everybody for joining. Thanks to John, and especially thanks to Melanie from Event Planning Blueprint for all of her great tips and for her help here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.